You pour every ounce of yourself into your work. You're the first to clock in, the last to walk out, always the one who says yes when others shake their head no. You follow every guideline, honor every rule, and sacrifice your evenings, your weekends, your health, all for the sake of advancement you believe is coming. You're proud of your loyalty and integrity, convinced that if you give enough, you'll someday receive enough in return. Yet, somehow, you end up watching someone who shirks responsibility, schmoozes the right people, or simply knows how to play the game float past you, snag the promotion you deserve, and start living the life you envision for yourself. You're left wondering what you did wrong, when maybe the real question is, what lie were you sold? From an early age, you were told that effort guarantees reward, that time spent equals value earned. The formula seemed simple: work hard, and the world will take care of you. But consider this: what if that equation has always been rigged? What if the promise of reward for honest toil was never meant for everyone? Friedrich Nietzsche, the German thinker who pried apart our most sacred beliefs, called this the myth of moral labor. He argued that the work we celebrate, obedient, self-sacrificing, humble labor, is not a path to nobility but a trap. It's a method of spiritual bondage that keeps capable people exactly where they are, working, loyal, unquestioning. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Power drives outcomes, not virtue. A system built on competition and hierarchy doesn't reward those who play by the rules. It rewards those who understand and seize power. Your nurse pulling a grueling 12-hour shift, your factory worker bending their body all day, they see their paychecks barely cover rent. Meanwhile, the person peddling get-rich-quick schemes on social media, flaunting fast cars and flashy lifestyles, rakes in more in a single day than that nurse makes all month. It's not an accident. It's how the game is played. This myth of moral labor was carefully constructed to keep people obedient, to stop them from asking the questions that truly matter. Who actually benefits from my grind? Who's cashing in on my commitment? Why does the world applaud long hours but reward cunning, not effort? Nietzsche didn't claim you should abandon work or flout every rule. He didn't glorify sloth or selfishness. Instead, he challenged the idea that blind toil is virtuous, that suffering without reward means you're noble. He called out slave morality, a value system born not from strength, but from fear and powerlessness. If you feel trapped despite following every rule, you're not losing your mind, you're waking up. You're beginning to see that the world isn't broken, it's performing exactly as intended. The people who climb to the top aren't necessarily the hardest workers or the most honest ones. They're the ones who recognize how power flows, who claim it, who detach their self-worth from the system's approval. They focus on controlling value, how to influence decisions, build networks and shape outcomes, rather than simply clocking in hours. So ask yourself, what if the answer isn't to work harder, but to work smarter? What if the belief that virtue lies in sacrifice is the very cage holding you back? As long as you cling to the idea that suffering alone will bring reward, you'll keep watching others rewrite the rules in their favor. Meanwhile, you'll keep grinding, unseen, underpaid, and undervalued. Take a closer look at the contradiction staring you in the face. If hard work truly led to success, then why do the people who labor hardest often struggle to make ends meet? Think about the early rising construction crews whose muscles ache by day's end. Think of the nurses racing through endless corridors, skipping breaks to keep patients alive. Think of the delivery drivers, janitors, bus operators, and truckers who keep our cities functioning. These are the people building the world, yet so many of them live paycheck to paycheck, afraid to fall ill because they can't afford even a day off. Meanwhile, someone documenting easy wealth on a smartphone can earn more in an afternoon than that tireless worker makes all month. This isn't a random glitch in the system, it's the system. Because while honest labor constructs our reality, bridges, hospitals, roads, it doesn't govern who profits from it. The rules of power favor those who control resources, influence decisions, and shape narratives. They favor those who understand that true value lies not in effort alone, but in the ability to leverage effort into advantage. Nietzsche's challenge remains as urgent now as it was over a century ago. Stop confusing moral labor with true power. Recognize that the virtue of suffering is a story told to keep you in line. Realize that success follows those who navigate power structures, who question the myths they've been fed, and who create value on their own terms. Only then can you step off the treadmill of endless work and start directing your energy toward the outcomes that matter. Because here's the final, brutal insight: the system isn't broken, it's built to work this way. And until you expose the lie of moral labor, you'll remain a captive to your own sacrifice. But the moment you see the chains for what they are, you can begin to forge a new path, one where effort aligns with true reward, and where your worth isn't measured by hours clocked, but by the value you control. The highest earners, CEOs, hedge fund managers, politicians, so-called thought leaders, aren't the ones breaking their backs in the sun or shivering through night shifts. They play an entirely different game, one built on leverage, perception, and control. They don't just put in hours, they position themselves to shape outcomes. They influence decisions far beyond anything a single worker could. They own pieces of the system that multiply their power. Meanwhile, hard-working people clock in, sweat through repetitive tasks, and yet see their efforts stuck at the bottom rung. The truth is stark. We live in a world that rewards power, not effort. Control over capital, networks, and the stories people believe pays far more than any amount of honest labor ever could. This setup didn't appear by accident. It's been crafted over centuries to favor those who can scale their reach. An assembly line worker can lift only so many boxes before exhaustion sets in. A nurse can save only one patient at a time. But an investor can shift billions with a keystroke and influence entire markets. The system itself is built to prize scale. Anything you can magnify an impact, that you can turn into a self-reinforcing loop, becomes more valuable than the lonely efforts of a single pair of hands. That's why the myth of moral labor is so harsh. It glorifies quiet sacrifice and humble service, yet ensures that those virtues never translate into true wealth or power. Society teaches us that suffering is noble, that if you endure without complaint, you're a moral pillar. And those who serve without question are hailed as the backbone of civilization. But praise is cheap, and virtue doesn't pay rent. While the working class is told to keep their heads down and be grateful for any crumbs, those at the top study strategy, law, negotiation, and capital growth. They learn not just to obey, but to manage, not just to endure, but to dominate. They write the rules that the rest of us then follow, often without even realizing the game has been rigged against our effort. Ask yourself, if moral labor is so essential, why doesn't it come with real power? Why do the people we cannot do without, teachers, cleaners, delivery drivers, home health aides, remain some of the most insecure and underpaid members of society? Why do we preach the value of hard work and then funnel the rewards to a few who never lifted a finger in the trenches? Nietzsche argued that this moral code was created by the powerful to pacify the powerless. It teaches obedience instead of sovereignty, self-sacrifice over self-assertion, submission rather than questioning the hierarchy. And the lie persists because it benefits those in charge. Because as long as people cling to the promise that suffering equals virtue, they'll keep striving and hoping, and they'll never ask who's really getting richer from their toil. Those in power know that the sweetest chains are made of hope. Promise someone that, someday, their pain will pay off, and they'll keep working forever for a reward that never arrives. And when they do offer a reward, it's just enough. A small raise, a title, a token plaque, to keep people dependent, to keep them believing the system has their best interests at heart, to stop them from demanding real change. If honest work doesn't bring true power, then what does? And are you ready to unlearn the beliefs you were raised with? To see that the rules you've lived by aren't universal truths, but strategies designed by others for their own gain? To uncover why the world continues to reward manipulation over merit, perception over perseverance, you have to dig into the origins of the moral values you follow. For that, Nietzsche's insights remain as vital now as ever. He saw morality not as a fixed law of the universe, but as a tactical tool wielded by those who understand power dynamics. He drew a clear line between master morality and slave morality. Master morality arises from strength. It celebrates ambition, boldness, creativity, and the will to shape reality. It doesn't wait for approval, it declares its own worth. In this code, good is defined by what enhances power, freedom, and the capacity to build and command. Strength itself becomes the highest virtue. Any trait that affirms life, possibility, and expansion is praised. Slave morality, by contrast, is born of weakness. It comes from those who can't win on the battlefield of influence. Instead of shaping the rules, they redefine them. They claim that humility trumps strength, that obedience is nobler than dominance, that suffering alone is a sign of moral purity. In this framework, the very qualities that once marked disadvantage are reframed as virtues, because it's the only way those without power can feel dignified. And once this moral code takes hold, it feels sacred, untouchable, absolute. This is how the praise for moral labor took root. The idea that good people are those who suffer for others, who never complain, who always say yes without expecting anything in return. We romanticize the self-sacrificing worker without seeing that this narrative lines the pockets of those who profit from silent compliance. Nietzsche would remind you, you are not rewarded for your morality. You are pacified by it. You're praised for being dependable, promoted for being manageable, rewarded not to empower you, but to keep you from asking questions. The system grants you minor symbols of success, just enough to keep you hopeful, just limited enough to keep you under control. Even as the true engines of wealth, ownership, control, power, remain out of reach, most people cling to the myth because it feels comforting. It gives pain meaning. It offers an explanation for unfairness without forcing us to challenge the status quo. This comforting fiction of slave morality persists not because it's accurate, but because it soothes fear. Yet Nietzsche did not aim to comfort, he aimed to awaken. He sought to jolt us into recognizing the terrifying freedom that comes when we stop waiting for justice and start forging our own terms. So the real question emerges, not just why we have been taught to endure unfairness, but who stands to gain when we do. If the system is so transparently designed to funnel rewards to a few at the top, why do so many talented, hard-working people continue to believe in it? Why do they keep chasing a promise that rarely delivers? To answer that, you must see the power of narrative, the strength of collective belief, and the ways in which moral labor has been sold to us as both reward and virtue. Once you understand the lie, you can begin to rewrite the rules for yourself. The root of the problem isn't just about money, it's rooted in our psychology, in lessons we learned long before we ever received a paycheck. From a young age, we're fed the comforting story that the world is fair. We hear tales of heroes who do what's right and are rewarded, of honest children who are praised, of students who study hard and see straight A's. Every bedtime story, every lesson plan, every cartoon seems to echo the same promise. Do the right thing, work hard, and the universe will reward you. But psychologists have a name for this belief: the just world fallacy. It's the idea that effort and virtue guarantee a payoff, that the world balances itself out so that good deeds always find their reward. It's a reassuring myth, one that helps us make sense of hardship. Yet it doesn't actually match reality. And clinging to it in a system designed to reward leverage over labor is more than naive. It's dangerous. While you're hunched over spreadsheets late into the night, crossing T's and dotting I's, someone else is learning the rules of influence. How to forge alliances, how to build a network, how to position themselves for maximum impact. When you say yes to extra shifts and extra assignments, they're asking, who can help me gain leverage? When you quietly shoulder every extra responsibility, they're quietly plotting to reshape the game to their advantage. You believe you're doing the moral thing. They're treating it as a strategic move. And in the contest that truly shapes outcomes, strategy always beats morality. This is why the engineer who keeps the servers humming around the clock gets outsourced or laid off, while the reputation manager with connections to powerful boards climbs the corporate ladder. This is why the nurse who gives up weekends and skips breaks to care for patients loses her bonus, while the hospital's marketing budget doubles. Society has trained you to trust fairness and reward honesty. Meanwhile, those who understand leverage know how to cut corners, how to negotiate deals, how to play the long game, and they prosper. Here's the cruel twist: the system doesn't just fail to reward honest labor, it exploits your belief in fairness to keep you in place. The longer you wait for your virtue to be acknowledged, the more docile you become. People who trust that the world will eventually recognize their sacrifice rarely make demands. They keep working, keep hoping for someday, and never realize someday may never come. Their faith in justice becomes a mechanism of control, a way to channel their energy back into the system without ever challenging it. This isn't simply a matter of dollars and cents. It's about mindset. If you proceed through life with the wrong map, believing the rules favor morality over leverage, you'll never arrive at the destination you want. The rules you were taught were designed to create good workers, not powerful people. They were written by those already in power, who knew exactly how to shape moral values to maintain their own advantage. They needed a workforce that would keep producing, keep sacrificing, without questioning the broader structure. And so they sold the story that virtue equals victory, when in fact virtue without strategy is a fast track to exploitation. If the world isn't fair and virtue doesn't guarantee success, then what actually moves the needle? How can you advance without turning into a ruthless opportunist? How do you claim your share of influence without losing your integrity? The answer isn't to abandon morality altogether. It's to stop worshipping it as the ultimate strategy. It's to recognize that in a world built on power, understanding power is part of true morality. Once you open your eyes to the fact that fairness is a comforting story, a narrative crafted to keep laborers in line, you can begin to write your own rules. You can shift from blind obedience to conscious ownership, directing your efforts toward outcomes you control rather than outcomes the system dictates. So what happens after you see through the lie? Once you accept that waiting to be rewarded for your obedience is a dead end, you don't throw away your principles. Instead, you redefine what strength means. Many people make the mistake of thinking the only alternative to being exploited is becoming callous. They imagine that to win, they must sacrifice empathy, generosity, and honesty. But Nietzsche never preached cruelty. He didn't suggest abandoning integrity. He taught that submission is not a virtue and that moral codes born of weakness must be overcome. He called for a morality of strength and creativity, one where the individual becomes the author of their own values rather than a servant to someone else's. In Nietzsche's framework, that individual is the Übermensch, the overman, not a tyrant, but a fully realized person who creates their own standards of value. The Übermensch doesn't sit around hoping for recognition. They define their own worth. They don't wait for promotion. They build an impact that can't be ignored. They learn how systems work but refuse to be bound by their outdated rules. They know when to play by the game's conventions, and more importantly, when to change the game altogether. They understand that power itself is not evil. It's an essential tool, especially when it's wielded ethically. Power over others is suspicious, but power over oneself, over your own direction, your own destiny, that's necessary for genuine leadership. You've encountered these people in real life. The entrepreneur who left a stable paycheck to launch a bold startup, the investor who transformed rejection into innovation, the creator who stopped seeking permission and began taking risks. Think of Elon Musk, who was fired from the very company he founded, dismissed by skeptics as reckless, until he built not just one, but multiple industry-shaping enterprises through vision, grit, and the refusal to be limited by fear. What sets these figures apart isn't just talent or timing, it's mindset. They didn't wait for others to validate them. They stopped asking, when will they notice my worth? And started asking, why have I been handing them that power in the first place? That shift, from waiting to creating, from submission to ownership, is precisely the path Nietzsche pointed to. It's how you step out of the cage of moral labor. But it demands sacrifices of a different kind. Letting go of the lure of being seen as the good worker is unsettling. You will disappoint people who thrived on your silence. You may find yourself standing alone for a while as you build a new foundation. This process calls for more than mere confidence. It calls for courage. The courage to claim your own worth and to treat morality not as a set of shackles, but as a guiding compass pointing to your personal north rather than someone else's approval. You can't forge your own path if you cling to morality as a cage. You have to see it as a tool that points you toward integrity, but also toward strategy and self-determination. So no, don't cast aside your values. Don't morph into another cynical player in pursuit of status for its own sake. But do learn the rules of leverage. Do recognize when you're being used and when you're genuinely respected. The future won't belong to those who obediently wait for the world to change. It will belong to those who blend principle with power, empathy with edge, who refuse to linger in the victim's corner and instead step into the architect's role. If you were raised believing that hard work alone would be enough, that if you kept your head down, stayed loyal, and played by the book, life would eventually reward you, then it's time to wake up. Not because honest work is worthless, but because it needs to be paired with strategy, leverage, and ownership. The real professional doesn't just labor. They perceive the system's mechanics, learn where the levers of influence lie, and, when the existing rules no longer serve them, they write new ones. That distinction separates mere survival from true leadership, being a cog in someone else's machine from becoming the architect of your own future. So if you're done waiting, if you've outgrown the myth that sacrifice alone will deliver you, if you're ready to think deeper, act smarter, and live on your own terms, this is where your journey truly begins.